This is the Sea Tales segment of our show where we illustrate through true stories how people have gotten into a bad situation, perhaps survived or not, and what we could do or you can do to better prevent getting into that situation or making it more survivable. Rather than tell a particular story, due to the fact that you do work at the boatyard, and when there's a bad wind out there and the seas are bad, you might see 10 or 20 people come in at one time that have had problems.
Let's hope it's not at one time.
Yeah, at one time or close, from a bad storm, which we do have quite a few out here. And could you illustrate a typical day that's a bad day?
Yeah, Mark. A couple of weeks ago, we had some high winds. It blew. There's a lot of sea stories involved, and I wasn't out. I took a look at the weather, and the ocean was all popcorn, and I decided that wasn't a day to go sailing, so I didn't go out. But a lot of people, this was Memorial Day weekend, in fact, went to the islands, and they were caught out there. So some of them decided, instead of staying in a safe harbor, if there were any out there at that time, to make it on back. And I'd like to give you the synopsis of events of 4 or 5 boats that in that one afternoon that got into difficulty. The first boat lost a rudder. Now this points up a situation where the fellow is a personal friend of mine, and had complained over the years that he thought his rudder was cracked. Turned out he was right. The rudder broke off in about 15-foot seas. The Coast Guard had to tow him into Channel Islands, and it was a very hairy event for he and his wife. There were only 2 people on board because he couldn't steer the boat. There was no way that he could steer the boat. And the Coast Guard ended up putting a drogue out, and it was a little nerve-rattling for him. The second boat lost a mast. Well, when I finally went over to see the damage, the mast had broken in 2, but the real problem was not the wind. The rigging on that particular sailboat, which is a 27-footer, was very old, very corroded, and when one wire goes, chances are all of them going to go. And that's what happened. It broke a forward lower, and that was enough to weaken the rig, and the mast fell down. Another boat, this is a good one.
Wait, did anyone get hurt in those?
No, no one got hurt. No one got hurt. No. This is just some of the things that went on
in one day
because people weren't thinking in one day. In this one afternoon, where the wind was in the neighborhood of 35 knots, which is pretty stiff breeze. This fellow had a brand new Ericsson 32. He had owned it 2 weeks. He loaned it to his friends. They took it to the islands for the weekend and brought it back with the bow all chewed up because they couldn't figure out how to get the anchor up in high weather. With the stern quarter railing torn off because they backed over a stern line and got it caught in the rub rail and ripped that off. And while they were backing, they backed into another boat, and they bent up the stern pulpit and the boarding ladder that goes over the stern, and also damaged another vessel. So the moral of that story is, if you loan your boat to somebody, ask them if they've taken a course in seamanship before you do. He was really heartbroken. And it's probably about $2,000 worth of damage to repair that.
And a lot of angry neighbors.
Well, and probably a broken friendship. Yeah. I mean, the guy's really bummed out that his new boat is now, not new anymore. Let's see, that's 3. 4? I don't know. I think I've run out of stories.
I know of a couple that I heard on the radio. I know the day of which you're speaking because it's recent. There was a 22-foot bayliner that had a man and a woman on board and 3 children, and their engine had gone dead. I guess they tried to start the engine until the batteries went dead, therefore they didn't have a radio, and they didn't have a reserve radio, so another man called in to call for them. And they were in 8-foot seas, 8 seconds apart, and the winds were, as you say, 25, 35 knots. What happened was the Coast Guard came up and had to take the children off the boat because it was breaking up as they tried to tow the boat in. And they dropped one of the children somehow because, it will happen in rough seas. You have to imagine the boats are rocking about tremendously, and one of the children fell between the two boats. Fortunately, they got the child up, without being injured or killed, which, you could be crushed quite easily. And I think the whole moral of the story is that, it might cause a divorce. Definitely the guy wants to get rid of the boat for whatever, the damage or whatever. Get rid of it cheap, you might say. And that's, of course, just the reports that I've heard on it, on the incident. But there is a tremendous amount of problems that come up on a bad day.
I think that's what you have to plan for. You have to plan for the worst scenario. And people don't. They plan for what they see in the brochure, which is a nice sunny afternoon, calm seas, fair breezes. And at any moment, it can change. The wind can come up, the fog can come in, the seas can build because of something that's coming down the channel that we're not aware of. And you're not going to get that information on the weather.
And it happens instantly. So
that's right.
I guess the moral of the story is, do practice man overboard drills on that sunny day instead of just going out having fun. Jump overboard and rescue each other, but do it safely and go through your drills. This has been Captain's Log. I hope that perhaps we can save a life, your life, or that of a loved one through these shows. My name is Mark Gray, and we'll see you next time.